There are lots of events in Roman history where had just one single person made a different decision, the world as we know it today would look completely different. Had Valens waited for reinforcements from his western co-emperor Gratian at the Battle of Adrianople, for instance, in 378 AD, the Romans would most likely have won and the Goths would have never become a problem. Or had Stilicho acted more decisively on the invasion of Gaul in 407, he most likely would have not fallen from grace with the emperor and thus the West might have been saved. Or had Majorian decided not to trust Ricimer and had been more cautious in his approach of restoring the Western Roman Empire, then the West might have been saved, and so on and so forth. But one of the most interesting what-if questions that always came to my mind concerns one of my favorite Roman emperors of all time, namely the Emperor Flavius Julianus, better known as Julian. What would have happened had this guy not gotten a bit too sure of himself and had he not invaded Persia? Imagine you are a 25-year-old guy who loves philosophy. You have spent your whole life studying the great Neoplatonic works of Plotin, the old works of Plato and Aristotle, and you have been taught by Maximus of Ephesus, where you discovered your love for the ancient pagan traditions of Rome. Imagine you have been summoned to the imperial court at Mediolanum at the age of 24, being promoted to Caesar of the Western Roman provinces without any prior experience of leadership whatsoever, summoned by the man who had ordered the execution of your father. Imagine then that you are thrown into cold water, being sent to Gallia in order to pacify this 400-year-old province of the Roman Empire, which lately had seen incursions by Germanic tribes who had at times managed to storm the Roman limes fortifications on the river Rhine. Imagine then that you, now aged 25, against all odds, without any military training whatsoever, not only managed to defend Gaul, but to decisively defeat the Alemanni multiple times, then later even to defeat the feared Franks, then to successfully invade Germanic territory across the Rhine River and to force these aggressive Germanic tribes into submission, thus saving Gaul from these invaders and forcing thousands of Germanic recruits to join the Roman forces. Imagine then that you are being proclaimed Augustus of the Roman Empire at the age of 29 at Lutetia, modern-day Paris. At the age of 30 then, you again decisively defeat the Alemanni, even capturing their king. Then, when the other emperor of the Roman Empire, Constantius II, the man who had murdered your father, marches against you in what would certainly become a battle for the ages, you are miraculously saved, as by a divine intervention. Constantius II is just struck down on his way to you by some disease, and with his last words, he is naming you his successor. Imagine that, then at the age of 30, you have now become the sole ruler of the entire Roman Empire, when only a few years ago you had no military experience whatsoever and were just a guy studying philosophy at Athens. What would you be thinking if that had happened to you? Would you be able to restrain yourself after such a series of incredible victories? Would you be able to not think that you were somehow chosen by the gods themselves in order to restore the Roman world to its former glory, to its old strength, as it had been hundreds of years before in the age of Caesar and of Augustus? Would you not think that somehow you were invincible and that you could even take on the most powerful enemy of the Romans, the old arch-nemesis, the Persians? That is what maybe the Emperor Flavius Julianus, known also as Julian, or sometimes also Julian II or Julian the Apostate, might have been thinking. It is the character flaw of many great emperors who had achieved incredible successes in a short period of time, that they were getting sometimes a bit too sure of themselves. They were riding the wave of success. They were on a constant high for years, rushing from victory to victory, on a constant dopamine surge, on a continuous body-induced high. This is what happened to the greats such as Aurelian, Probus, and even to Majorian. And so it also befell the Emperor Julian. We will never know what he was really thinking, but probably he wanted to not only restore the old polytheistic religion of the Roman Empire and to reduce the power of Christianity, but to also win a decisive victory over the Persian Empire. Because should he succeed in doing so, he would become a second Alexander the Great, revered and loved by both pagans and Christians. The Christians would then have no choice but to accept him, and maybe thus he could convince many of them to return back to the old traditional gods. And so this young heroic character embarked on his ill-fated campaign in March of 363 AD with a Roman force about 80,000 men strong, invading the Persian Empire. After some initial success, even coming close to taking Ctesiphon, the capital of the Persian Empire, the tides turned against him. And even though he later managed to again gain some ground, he was mortally wounded in a skirmish in late June of 363 AD. And thus died this young charismatic emperor, and with him died all the hopes of the pagans to restore the old ways of Caesar and of Augustus. But what if Julian would have been more of a reserved character? What if he had not made the same mistake as the other great ones of Roman history, namely getting too sure of themselves? What if he would have remained modest, careful, and more strategic? In short, what if Julian had not decided to embark on that ill-fated Persian campaign in 363 AD? Hello dear friends of late Roman history, sorry for the brief interruption, it's me again. I just wanted to take the time and thank all the people who support Maiorianus via Patreon and YouTube membership. You guys make all the difference. I cannot thank you enough, because thanks to the support by amazing people like you, I can continue making videos about late Roman Empire topics, because we want to learn more about this obscure and fascinating era of the late Roman Empire that everyone is brushing over. So I'm really thankful that thanks to our amazing supporters, I can focus on these late Roman history topics. So please consider supporting Maiorianus via Patreon or a YouTube membership, because only a few bucks a month can make all the difference and can allow me to not have to worry about YouTube algorithm every day and about making clickbait thumbnails and clickbait titles, but that would allow me to focus my mental energy on better research for interesting topics about the late Roman Empire. All the things that you will not find anywhere else on YouTube. All the strange and obscure and forgotten topics of the late Roman Empire that historians just brush over sometimes all too fast. This would allow me to continue making videos on such topics. So thank you very much, friends, for supporting Maiorianus. And I would like to thank again all the people who support Maiorianus via Patreon or YouTube membership or even a PayPal donation. Every single buck makes a difference and allows me to make better researched videos about the late Roman Empire. Thank you so much, friends of late Roman history, and back to the video. Let's say that Julian's character would have been different. One or the other genetic trait might have been different, or one or the other childhood event would have gone differently, thus affecting him in some way. Let's say that consequently he would not have been so affected by his previous successes, and that he would have stayed at Constantinople. Julian, in our timeline, entered Constantinople as the sole emperor of the Roman Empire in December 361, and he left the city half a year later in May 362. His choice to reside in Antioch was of course clear. Not only was it an important city, but also of importance to the pagans because of the oracle of Apollo in Daphne, which was located near to Antioch. But of course, Antioch, being near to the border with Persia, was the traditional amassing ground for the Eastern Roman troops, for wars with the eternal enemy in the East. Had Julian not decided to attack Persia, consequently I think that he would then not have moved to Antioch, but he would have continued to stay in Constantinople, and instead of making the Persian campaign his main goal, he would have used all of his energy to create a new Neoplatonic pagan religion as a counterweight to Christianity. Julian knew exactly that Christianity was gaining ground, mostly for the reason that Constantine and his sons had systematically favored Christians for high state offices instead of pagans, and that more and more anti-pagan laws had been implemented, which just made it unattractive to be a pagan, therefore basically forcing many people to convert to Christianity. Julian was already during his short reign successful in reverting some of Constantine's and his sons' laws. For one, he had all the pagan temples throughout the empire reopened, and in order to make paganism attractive, he intended to elect high priests similar to the Christian bishops and popes, who would attract new worshippers. We should not forget that even Julian's time, not even half of the population was actually Christian. It is estimated that only about 20 to 30% of the population of the Roman Empire were Christians, even in that time. Especially in the West and the old pagan strongholds such as Rome, we can be quite sure that their number was actually even lower. In the East, it was probably higher, but still, Christianity was in those times far from sure of winning over the other religions. And so, had Julian decided to stay at Constantinople longer, he would of course have continued with his religious restoration policy of the old gods. He was very intelligent and knew that in order to win against Christianity, he would have needed to pour further fire into the dissent that was already raging between all the different splinter groups of Christianity, between the Arians against the Nicenes, against the Donatists, and so forth. Without choosing one side over the other, as happened in our timeline, with the ultimate triumph of the Nicene Creed over Arianism, the Christians would have fought themselves and possibly hindered their own growth through constant religious wars against each other. This would have given Julian time in order to appoint high priests based on his Neoplatonic pagan belief system and to send them to all major cities of the empire, thus building up a counterweight to the bishops there, possibly also embracing a more monotheistic pagan approach, for instance centered on Sol, but of course updated with all sorts of philosophic and moralistic worldviews in order to appeal to Christians as well. All temples would have remained open, and so the temples of the old Agora at Constantinople, which in those years were still in good condition, would have been rededicated, renovated and reopened. Of course, this would have made him many enemies, and it is clear that he would have needed to stay very vigilant, because the more radical and fanatic Christians would have certainly not shied away from assassination attempts. That is why he would have kept his Frankish general Nevita, whom he had appointed consul in 362, close by at all times, together with a large retinue of Frankish bodyguards. Julian tried to imitate the style of Marcus Aurelius, whom he saw as the ideal ruler, a notion which makes sense, since Marcus was indeed an awesome emperor, and so Julian debated the senators at Constantinople on an equal footing, seeing himself as the first among equals again, as in the old days. But by Julian's time, the Dominate had implanted this image of the grandiosity of the emperor into the minds of people to such a degree that for quite some years his tries to restore the old ideals of the early Principate would have been met with quite some criticism and raised eyebrows. But of course, many senators would have welcomed this unusual return to the old glory days of the Senate. Julian would have restored many of the old pagan sites, such as for instance the Oracle at Delphi, and under his rule the Olympic Games would have continued unabated. It is quite likely that sooner or later Julian would have entered Rome, the old mother city. He knew exactly that in order to restore the old ideals of the empire, he would find many allies in the old venerable Senate of Rome. And so he entered Rome in 364 AD, residing in the old palace on the Palatine Hill, which had stood empty without a residing emperor there since the days of Maxentius, if you don't count the short stay of Constantius II in 357. From Rome, the old traditional, still very pagan heart of the empire, he could further and more easily enact the pagan revival than from the more Christianized Constantinople. In Rome, he was sure to have the backing of the still overwhelmingly pagan Senate. Unfortunately though, it is quite unlikely that Julian would have had any children. His wife Helena had died already in 360 from unknown causes, and he had sworn celibacy for life after her death. And so in order to restore the old ways from what he rightfully recognized as the glory days of the empire, the days of Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus or Marcus Aurelius, he would have most likely chosen a successor in form of the old adoptive system. He might have chosen a pagan senator, educated in philosophy like him, who would have shared his beliefs. And so as the years would have gone by, logically therefore, had he lived longer, then Jovian would not have happened, nor would have Valens and Valentinian happened. It would have been very interesting to see how Julian would have handled the Gothic invasion of the mid-370s. The Huns would have pressured westward even in that timeline, and I think Julian would have chosen a capable junior emperor for the western provinces as his adoptive son, whom he would have left in Rome to govern the west from the old capital. He, meanwhile in his 40s, would have still been energetic enough to deal with the Gothic migrations. Foreseeing the massive problems these migrations could have caused, he would have moved back to Constantinople in order to deal with the problem. He might have handled the problem better than Valens, who in our timeline was far away from the Danube at Antioch, and arrived too late when the damage had already been done and the Goths had already rebelled. But Julian had experience with Germanic tribes. He had defeated the Alemanni and the Franks, and his loyal and trusted general Nevita, with his Frankish foederati, would have remained at the side of his emperor. And so Julian might have been able to settle the Goths into Roman territory without escalating the situation, as happened in our timeline. The Gothic settlers would have been given lands, but they would have had to give up their kings and join the Romans as Romans. In turn, Rome would have offered them protection from the invading Huns. And so Julian would have had new Gothic foederati at his service, joining the ranks of his Frankish foederati. The disaster at Adrianople would not have happened, and so consequently Theodosius would also not have happened. Therefore, the religious intolerance of Christianity would have never gotten out of hand. Therefore, there would not have been all the religious riots as in our timeline, and the empire would have also been spared his two incompetent sons, Honorius and Arcadius. Instead, Julian and his junior co-emperor, let's call him Aemilianus, would have jointly dealt with the Germanic invasions. Julian securing the east, while Aemilianus was securing the west from further incursions, while strengthening the Limes border. Let us say Julian would have reached the respectable age of 65 and would not have been assassinated due to his loyal Frankish bodyguards protecting him. Thus, he would have died in 396 AD, leaving behind no children, but Aemilianus would have taken the title of Augustus, and he in turn would have chosen a junior emperor, Julian III. Julian would have been deified as the old emperors in a spectacular ceremony either at Rome or Constantinople, probably more likely in pagan Rome, and he would have been buried in his own mausoleum. And of course, he would not have been remembered as Julian the Apostate, but as Julian the Great. Christianity would not have become the dominant power that it had become in our timeline. While the Christians were busy fighting each other, a new Neoplatonic paganism would have emerged, offering the people a viable alternative to Christianity. But Christianity would have not vanished, and who knows if at some point it would have made a comeback. Just one radical Christian emperor would have been enough, and it might have all reverted back to a Theodosian-style theocracy. But as long as the Julianic lineage of adoption would have worked, we might have seen a true revival of paganism and a new golden age as in the 2nd century AD. Pagan emperors would have ensured a continuation of the old belief system, and there would not have been a final split into East and West, but the adoption system of senior and junior emperors would have remained intact. And the Senate would have enjoyed much more power, and so the ruling style would have possibly resembled more the days of the Principate. The invasions of Raetia, of Italy, of Gallia and Hispania from 401 to 407 AD would not have happened, since Honorius would not have risen to power, nor would have an Alaric been there to harass the Western Roman Empire. Also, because of no Theodosius as emperor, there would not have been a battle of the Frigidus River. Thus, there would not have been a necessity to withdraw troops from the Rhine frontier for the defense of Italy against Alaric and Radagaisus. Hence, the invasions of 406 and following years could have been repelled much more easily and thus with a high chance of success. And so, in the Julianic timeline, the Western Roman Empire might have survived far longer, since there would not have been this definitive split and estrangement between East and West. Therefore, had Julian not invaded Persia, the world as we know it today would look utterly different. The Roman Empire might have fallen a lot later, and paganism might have survived even until modern times in some form. But many of the intrinsic problems of the Roman Empire might have still never been solved. The constant propensity for usurpations, the debasement of the currency, the barbarization of the Roman army. And so maybe even in the Julianic timeline, the Roman Empire would have fallen. But if, then in a very different form and for very different reasons than in our timeline. It would be a very interesting world for sure. But let us not forget that for the people living in that timeline, our world would be utterly fascinating to them. And I would especially like to thank our new Sol Invictus supporters, Kyle Smith, Garage Gamer, and Sean Verdecia or Sean Verdeccia. I'm not sure if you're Italian or not, so please forgive me. Thank you so much, guys, for supporting this channel in the utmost generous way possible. Thanks Kyle Smith, Garage Gamer, and Sean Verdecia or Verdeccia for your amazing support. And I would also like to thank our new Restitutor Orbis supporter, Pierre-Henri Connac. Thank you so much, Pierre-Henri Connac, for supporting this channel in such a generous way. And I would also like to thank our new Caesar supporters, Ambrosius, Bremwin, and Todd Howard. Thank you so much, guys, Ambrosius, Bremwin, and Todd Howard, for supporting Maiorianus in such a generous way. Seriously, guys, this channel is only possible thanks to our amazing Patreon supporters and YouTube members. It's amazing people like you who make this channel possible, so I really thank you from the bottom of my heart. Gratias tibiago, amici. And if you want to learn more about the sons of Constantine, you can watch this video in the upper right corner. But if you want to learn more about how paganism was suppressed by Christianity, you can watch the other video in the lower right corner. I say thanks again to all friends of Roman history, gratias tibiago and bene valete.